What's up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Happy to be talking some Cardinals spring training baseball once again with Jeff Jones, just back in St. Louis after being down in Jupiter, Florida for about 3 weeks. Jeff, how you doing, man?
Not bad. Either from the bags under my eyes or the nice little sunglass shape I have going on either side. I guess you can tell that I was down there for a little bit. But, back here, glad to be back in the 40-degree rain after 3 weeks in the 80-degree sunshine.
Yeah, we got some nice sleet and rain going on. A beautiful early March day in St. Louis. Let's start it like this. Just for Jeff Jones, give me your biggest Cardinals spring training storyline so far. What do you think is the hottest story for the Cardinals right now?
It's Jordan Walker, and I think it's Jordan Walker by a lot. I think going into this spring, a lot of us sort of looked at where the Cardinals were in terms of the guys they had who can play the outfield and maybe the way that you would traditionally look at top prospects being handled around baseball. And I think a fair assessment would have been, okay, look, Walker's going to get into some spring games. Maybe he's going to get off to a good start. Maybe he's not. And the Cardinals can slow pedal it in such a way to where they give him a shot to make the team, but not really, kind of, right? We've seen that before. But I think that they're giving him a shot. I think he's put himself into a position now where, I wouldn't say as of today, as of March 3rd, that he's a favorite to make the roster. But a week ago, I got asked what the number was, and I would have said more than 30, less than 50. Today, I would say more than 40, less than 60. So closer to coin flip than not.
So here's a guy that, I feel like he got way bigger, not just in good weight muscle, but 6'6", 250. This guy is going to be a legit power hitter. And I think it's also the athleticism that a lot of people are excited about. That first game, of course, he hits the 430-foot homer, but then he legs out an infield single, and he's running, 29 feet per second.
Right.
Again, I want to manage expectations, but it does seem like this guy can do it all.
It does. And, for me, it was really interesting watching him in the opening weeks of camp and getting some shot in kind of that live BP setting against some of the more advanced hitters. And it was really fascinating to watch. Like, you could see progress day over day with him. You could see him have one day have an appearance against Drew Verhagen, for example, where he got diced up. Verhagen threw him, fastball and 3 curveballs, and Walker got torn up and struck out and went back to the dugout. Then a day later, he's in the box against Ryan Helsley, and then all of a sudden, that's a 9 pitch at bat. Now, he still struck out. Helsley bounced a slider 2 feet in front of the plate, and he was way in front of it. So, struck out, didn't look great, but you could see the progress. The at-bats got better. Then all of a sudden, we get to game action, and, he has that at-bat against Johnny Cueto where, look, it's an 88-mile-an-hour sinker, and Cueto was 48 years old or whatever he is. But it wasn't it wasn't center cut, right? Like, it was inner half. It was off the inside of the plate, and you see him pull the hands in, get around it, and hit a ball to a spot where people don't hit a ball at Roger Dean. You mentioned the speed, the tools. Right before that infield single, he fouled the ball off his foot. So he got to that sprint speed after literally fouling the ball off his foot the pitch before. So, yeah, he's a special athlete. And he's getting to a point where eventually the knock is going to be loud enough that the Cardinals are going to have to force him down rather than look for reasons to pull him up.
And Jordan Walker is part of the equation for this next question here. But when talking about the position players, I've said all offseason, I don't know which ones are going to play well. If you're talking about the outfielders, DH, throw Gorman in there, Yepez, whoever it is. But I have confidence that enough of them. If we talk about the 6 guys that we always mention, throw in a Walker, a Burleson, I think they have enough guys that 3 or 4 are going to hit. So I guess the question is, who do you think, if you had to bet on, whether it's Carlson, whether it's O'Neill, whether it's Newpart, whether it's all those guys, Gorman, Yepez, Burleson, who do you think is really going to step up this year? Anybody you're thinking, hey, I'm not buying the hype on one of those guys?
Yeah, I think it's when you look at that group of guys, when you look at the ways that opportunities might present themselves, no one has shown anything in spring thus far that would make me be down on an individual player. Even Carlson has shown a little bit of pop from the left side, has a couple of doubles batting left-handed, looks closer back to normal. For me, when I look at it, what I'm looking at is who they're going out of their way to create opportunities for and who that might squeeze. So, for example, in the case of Tyler O'Neill, evidently O'Neill met with them on the way into spring, said, I want to play center field. And that's great for him because you look at the guys who can hit 25 homers and play center field. It's a very short list of guys who make a whole lot of money on the free agent market where O'Neill could be in 2 years. So you get it from his perspective. From the team perspective, there wasn't really a need to do that because you can make the argument that of the three guys, he is maybe the third best defensively in center. All three of those guys, I think, are adequate, somewhere in the vicinity of plus, but not great. O'Neill is the guy who you could see them making an argument against. Let's keep him healthy. It's not necessary. But they made the space for him. Okay, that's fine. If they're making the space for him, why? The obvious reason would be for Walker, right? Okay, if we think that O'Neill is going to be to play center and Walker's going to play left, and that's how that shapes out. I say all that to say the guy who gets squeezed there maybe ends up being Yepez. It's hard to say that again that could happen to him. And wouldn't it be ironic if last spring he gets squeezed out for one of the oldest players in baseball, and this spring he gets squeezed out one of the youngest players in baseball in back-to-back years? But I do think there is a little bit of risk of Juan Yepez entering what we were calling down in spring the Jake Woodford zone, where there's just he doesn't need to be at Memphis, pointless. But it's not entirely clear where maybe he would fit on the big league roster, and Walker is the guy who could make that happen to Yepez. Whereas Burleson, for instance, hits left-handed, which helps. Now, if Gorman also hits, maybe there's only space for one of those guys, but you can sort of see where the pressures come. And you're right, they only need, of those, 6 guys, if 3 of them exceed expectations, and they very easily could, they'll be in really good shape.
That's funny. The Jake Woodford zone. I love it. And it's so true of so many players in recent years have been in that spot. This is my take on some of the guys you mentioned. I want to know if you agree. So, look, the Cardinals have 5 starters, at least. Will they all make it to the trade deadline? Will it have to be the same story the last couple years where you get the LeBlanc, Happ, Lester situation? Last year you get the Montgomery, Quintana situation. So to me, if they run into that innings crunch again, which they probably will, I'm just wondering, is the Yepez, Burleson, maybe not Gorman, but at that point, is that probably where you have to move one of these guys for pitching, maybe for 2023, but also get a starting pitcher with some control beyond this year?
Yeah, it's a really interesting spot for them because when you look at what they have pitching-wise, we mentioned Woodford and Dakota Hudson too, and I wrote about this for this morning. There's no reason for those guys to go to Memphis. There's nothing they can do in Memphis that they can't do in the big leagues. But at the same time, where do they fit on a big league roster, right? And so you're right. They're going to need pitching at some point during the season because that's just how that works. It's really hard for me to square that with knowing they do have extra guys right now. And realistically, you look at how the bullpen is constructed, there's 7 right-handers who by rule can't go to the minors, even if they wanted to do it. Chris Stratton is in the big leagues. Wilking Rodriguez is on the roster unless they're sending him back to the Yankees. There are guys who have kind of control over their own fate. Dakota Hudson is 100 days of service time short of being able to stop an option. He's out of luck. Jake Woodford was not down in the minors for long enough in 2020 to burn an option here. He's out of luck. That's how this can work out for these guys. And so I think that you're right. And when you look at the way that a pitcher with control might look, maybe it's not just, okay, what does Burleson, what does Yepez, what do these guys get them? Maybe it's what kind of starter do you get if it is one of the pitchers plus one of the bats? And what kind of player does that look like? And maybe even by the end of spring. Again, if everyone gets out of spring healthy, then they're going to have to make some tough choices, and maybe there's not room for that kind of move. But you can sort of see how that depth develops over the course of the season, and how are they better off spending that person capital rather than just stashing guys in Memphis for no reason.
And because you brought it up, the million right-handers in the pen, am I wrong? Did the Astros have no lefties through their playoff World Series run?
I believe that's correct. They might have for the World Series added one rookie, but right. Yeah, by and large, you're right. Yeah.
So are you concerned about the left side of the pen? Because I think we all like Zach Thompson. Is he your number one lefty out of the pen? Do you feel great about that? And then who am I forgetting also with the left side? Oh, of course, Genesis Cabrera. You just wonder, obviously 2022 wasn't great for him. Do you think the Cardinals are in a bit of a rough spot from the left side?
They could be. I think they're in a spot where right now they're willing to kind of attack it with numbers and see if anybody shakes out. I think Thompson is a guy who they're definitely going to trust, and I would expect him to kind of have those prime assignments out of the bullpen. Palante is a guy that they like, and remember, Palante is a guy who had reverse splits last season, so you can treat him as your long man / extra lefty that puts you in a spot. And then they basically need one of Cabrera and Jojo Romero and Andrew Suarez and Anthony Misevich and even maybe Liberatore and Tom. I mean, one of those guys, one of them has to work before they have to start worrying about it. And I think the odds are pretty good that they can get one useful pitcher out of that collection of relievers. And if they can't, yeah, you can add a lefty at the deadline. Those guys are seemingly always available. But I do think they probably have enough time to sort of cycle through the other guys. Even Tacky Naughton, who we haven't even mentioned, right, who was on a playoff roster last year. They have guys who they can use, who they can try to get something out of before, maybe like the deadline rolls around.
Okay, so spring training, you usually have these press conferences for different reasons. We had the one with John Mozeliak, but sometimes on the rough end, they're because of an injury. Other times because of contract extensions. We haven't really had any of those yet, besides Mo. So starting with health, I mean, is it fair to say this team is pretty dang healthy? But then lately, you're hearing obviously, so Waino's velo is down. I mean, Waino doesn't throw 95 anyway, but still 86 is different than 89. So how about Waino and also Flaherty? Are you concerned at all, Flaherty just being pushed one day for his start?
Yeah, to start with Flaherty, if it really is just one day, then no. Like, if it really is pushed one day, then I'm sure it's fine, and it's whatever, things happen. If it's not one day, if all of a sudden it becomes, well, actually, it's going to take a little longer, and well, actually, maybe the next time he's going to go back to the backfield to not be in the stadium. If we start getting to like 3 turns through the rotation and they're making excuses for Flaherty not to be in the stadium, then it's probably time to be concerned. As far as Wainwright goes, this is one where it's really hard to know how to feel about it because, like you mentioned, Wainwright is not a guy who throws with a lot of velocity, but at the same time, I don't know that you can live in the big leagues at 85 as a starting pitcher. Clearly, he can live at 88, right? And so it's a narrow window, but he does have to get there. And while you give Adam Wainwright all the benefit of the doubt and you trust him to know his body, you trust him to figure it out, this is also a guy who had a really bad 6 weeks to end the season. And then when we come to find out after the season, somehow couldn't figure it out until the season was over. What the problem was with his mechanics, he's talking about, well, he had some back spasms, and so his left leg isn't firing the way he wants it to. This is all stuff that sounds reasonable, right? But at some point, there is the sort of nagging acknowledgement that he was bad for the last 6 weeks of the year last year, and he is having trouble breaking 86 so far in spring this year, and he's 41. Like, all of these things are true at the same time. And so I don't think it's like an alarm bell situation, but it's, I don't know. I don't do auto racing. Is it a yellow flag? Is that the caution flag?
Yes.
I think it's maybe caution flag time for Adam Wainwright.
Yeah, I trust Adam Wainwright to figure it out. But as you mentioned, it also seemed like it took a hell of a long time to figure out the whole landing foot issue, if that really was the issue that caused him to struggle at the end of last year. And then I think this also wraps into a World Baseball Classic conversation, which we've been talking a lot about on the radio. And I'm a fan of the World Baseball Classic. I think it's cool. I don't think it's on the level of the Olympics or the World Cup or anything like that. But I do have a bit of concern with pitchers. If I'm Miles Michaelis and maybe I'm going to get an extension, I'd probably want that signed before I throw a pitch for Team USA. And then here's Adam Wainwright. Again, I trust him, but if he's going through that typical dead arm or whatever's going on in the spring, I mean, maybe it's not the best time to throw competitive innings for Team USA. Maybe that's where you dial it back with some rest, you do some long toss, whatever it is. I mean, do you think the World Baseball Classic is the best thing to go to right now if you're Waino dealing with whatever he's dealing with?
I think the WBC, the way the teams are going to look at it is when it comes to hitters, they don't care, and they're in favor of it. Get the guys some game reps at faster speed, sure. And when it comes to pitchers, teams are going to be holding their breath until the thing is over. You mentioned Michaelis. I think that there is a broad expectation that the Cardinals and Miles Michaelis are going to come to a contract extension, maybe even before the end of spring. It's not going to happen until he gets back from the WBC, because why would the you're right about Michaelis wanting to do it, but why would the Cardinals put themselves in a spot where they agree to a big deal and then the guy goes off to the WBC and who knows what happens, right? And so that's going to be a little bit of a hitch in that process. And yeah, if you're looking at Adam Wainwright, you're going to be nervous. And if you're the Cardinals and you're wanting to evaluate your left-handers, are you thrilled that Jojo Romero is going to be gone for 2 weeks? Are you thrilled that Giovanni Gallegos, who is getting there with the pitch clock but isn't there yet, is going to be gone for 2 weeks, not pitching on the pitch clock? I think that you're probably not really excited about that. So yeah, their teams are going to hate it for pitchers no matter what they say. MLB wants them to be very supportive, and when the reporters are on, they are very supportive. But I do think that there are going to be a lot of teams really holding their breath with their pitchers until they get back and healthy.
So on the topic of those extensions, to me, Miles Mikolas is the first obvious candidate that comes to mind. So what do you think his extension will look like? And then who else could be in the mix? Jordan Montgomery, for example. Do you think that's somebody they'd want to bring back and sign already? Do they need to see more this season? I mean, is he a guy that maybe wants to hit the market? And then also Paul Goldschmidt with 2 years left, so there's no urgency. But even though Paul Goldschmidt wasn't drafted by the Cardinals, he almost already feels like that legacy Cardinal that's going to get that extension, which he deserves it. Will it be great if they give him a couple years and he's 38? I'm trying to do the math. I don't know, but he does feel like a candidate.
He does. So Goldschmidt's current deal expires after next year. At the end of next season, he will be 37. So, is that 3 years and $100 million on an extension for Goldschmidt? It's probably close. It's probably close to that. Maybe it's 390. Maybe Goldschmidt doesn't squeeze them for every nickel, but it's not far off from that, right? Like it's definitely probably 3 at more than 85, or maybe 2 in a vest, but it's somewhere in there.
So hold on a second. I don't mean to interrupt. So are you saying so he'll be 37 at the end of the next 2-year deal?
Of his current contract, right? Because he has this year plus one more. He'll be 37 at the end of next year.
So you think he could get, for ages 37, 8, 9 seasons, still get potentially pushing 100 for 3?
Yeah, I'm talking 8, 9, 40. Yeah. Because his current deal goes through 37. So his 38, 39, 40-year-old. Wow. Yeah, I do think that's possible, especially, and that is the interesting question for the extension, right? Because the Cardinals had the Matt Carpenter experience, who was 4 years younger at the time when they made that deal, and that went disastrously wrong. So, maybe for both parties, you take it through the season, but maybe not. Maybe you're comfortable with where you're at, and that's sort of how that works out for you, and that's how the market is trending, and I to talk about like what a Mikolas extension might look like. What springs to mind is the Padres. And so the Padres give Yu Darvish this deal that I think it was 6,104 or something that takes Darvish to the time he's 42. But that deal was structured in a funny way where Darvish gets like $30 million up front, and then it tapers off toward the back end, in the same way that Machado's new deal gives him a bunch of signing bonus money that's actually paid out over 8 years, but it's a signing bonus, so it doesn't go into the CBT calculations. And so what the Padres are doing is structuring these contracts to keep their luxury tax number as low as possible while still giving their guys money. And so the Cardinals, could you see a situation where Goldschmidt even gets, let's say it's 4 years and $100 million, but he gets in the first 3 years of that deal, 35 a year or whatever. It gets 8 million in the last, something like that. That's possible. That's a way to keep the CBT number down, to spread the money out and still give Goldschmidt his money, right? And so in terms of Mikolas, is Mikolas going to get a 6-year deal? He's not. But is he going to get a 4-year deal? Yeah, probably. And, I think 470 is probably about the right number when you look at, what Miles Mikolas has done and sort of historically what he's brought. He had those 2 years where he was hurt, but pitchers get hurt. And when he's been healthy, he couldn't have been any more effective than what they asked him to do.
And how about Montgomery? Do you think he's a candidate?
I'm curious to see how they view that. I mean, frankly, I'm curious to see how he views it. I don't know that I think that the process of being traded last summer was not his favorite thing. And I think that there was a little bit of shell shock in kind of going from the Yankees to here and dealing with kind of the aftermath of that. And frankly, I think it was also weird for him that his first start as Cardinal was against the Yankees. And so that it became like his first 2 weeks in St. Louis were all about the Yankees, which I think frustrated him to some extent and didn't start the whole thing great. I would be curious to know what his view on it would be. And I would not be surprised if he was a guy who really did want to get to free agency, especially because when you look at what the Cardinals have done historically, I have a hard time seeing them giving big extensions to 2 pitchers in spring. And so, if you're Montgomery, you're not taking the 4-year deal at 18 per. Why take that? Go to free agency. And so that's what the deal would look like from the Cardinals, and I wonder if it would. then he wouldn't really have a reason to consider that anyway.
So now, big picture on the starting rotation, just how do you feel about it overall? I feel like my opinion really hasn't changed since the offseason because they didn't really address it in terms of anything beyond bringing back Adam Wainwright. But I like the rotation. I don't think it's elite. I still think unless Flaherty is a true one, they don't look great matching up in the playoffs. I don't worry about them necessarily in the regular season. They have enough Woodford zone guys, 6th and 7th, Dakota Hudson, if there's an injury. But I just wonder, you got some age concerns, you got health concerns with almost all of them. What do you think?
When I think about the rotation, there's an old George Carlin bit, and I'll soften it, where he says, "I've never dated a 10." Okay,
on YouTube,
I can say the whole thing. Okay, well, what he says is, I actually don't remember what he says is, I've never fucked a 10, but I have fucked 5 2s. Is the George Carlin joke, right? And I do think that there is something to that, and like the Cardinals don't have a 1, but do they have 5 2 3s? Yeah, I think they do, and I think that's the guys that they have. And so, is that how much do you need a 1 if your 5 is a 2? I guess is the way to look at it, right? And I don't know, and I think we're going to find out what that looks like, because even last year, when you kind of look at how they went through the season, they didn't have that guy last year either. Michaelis, maybe Michaelis was a guy who was a 1, and you look at what Quintana gave them after the break, and there were a couple of weeks of Montgomery where they had guys go in spurts. And I do kind of wonder if they look at that and they say, even if Flaherty is not 2019 Jack Flaherty, maybe he's 2019 Jack Flaherty for a month, and maybe Miles Michaelis is that guy for 6 weeks, and maybe Jordan Montgomery is that guy for a month, and maybe they get 8 starts out of Steven Matz that are just 7-inning shutout starts. And if you piece that together, the constituent parts of that kind of become what they would want a number 1 to be, and then they reassess at the deadline. So I think it's a fair concern, and I think it's the most glaring spot on the roster where there's a hole. The problem is the upgrade this like right now, over this past winter especially, unless they were going to go get Carlos Rodon, the upgrade is not super obvious. And so, like, I don't really fault them for not wanting to dig into Jose Quintana. Like, for example, with Quintana, how much better right now over a full season is Quintana than Jake Woodford? Really? I don't know that it's a lot. Not really. And so I think that it's really kind of okay how they handled it in the offseason. The question is going to be, if they get to the deadline and that hole is still there, and they haven't been able to patch it, can they find it? And then the question is, what happens in the winter? Because if they do get to the winter and it's, Matt's under contract, and say they extend Michaelis and then it's 3 question marks, that's going to be really fascinating, because who's a free agent again this winter? Almost certainly Max Scherzer.
Yeah. Always gets back to old Mad Max, the St. Louis and the Parkway Central.
Eventually they have to pick up the phone. Like the last 2 times he was a free agent, they didn't even call. At some point, they got to pick up the phone, you would think.
Yeah, he also feels like a guy. It's almost like in the vein that I always feel like David Perron is going to end up back with the Blues at least one more time to finish his career. Even though Max Scherzer has never pitched for the Cardinals, I feel like he's going to end his career with 1 year with the Cardinals, which we always thought Mark Burley was going to do, but then he never actually did that. So I liked your Carlin line. I agree with it. Here's my problem with it, though. I think that really works in the regular season. The problem is, if you have these short series in the postseason, if you don't have a top 2 seed, it's like you don't even get to the point where your depth becomes an advantage. Like against the Phillies, for example. If things don't go crazy in game 1, well, okay, then you're probably split after 2. Maybe the Cardinals have the advantage in game 3 if they're throwing whoever it is, Montgomery or Jack Flaherty. Like, I love the idea of 5 guys that are 2s or 3s, but man, it seems like in the playoffs, it just maybe the stats don't back this up. I feel better if you have those. Like, I feel better with Nola and Wheeler. I feel better with Scherzer and Verlander than what the Cardinals are rolling out.
Yeah, and I think that part of it too is the specific way they got knocked out of the playoffs last year. Is because they had to go through those 2 guys, and in the second game of that series, the offense didn't get going at all. But when you look at the starters, you look at the second game of that series from a pitching perspective, it was Michaelis giving way to Montgomery, and it worked pretty well, exactly as well as they could have won it. They lost, was it 2-0 in game 2? Like, they didn't score, but they allowed 2 runs. They should win that game. I don't know. You're right that it definitely feels better going into a series with those guys. At the same time, it's really hard to say because when we talk about like the impact that a starter has over a season, that shouldn't be a one-game impact, right? Like we know enough about the way the probability and how the edge and all that stuff works that it shouldn't matter in a one-game, two-game series, but it definitely feels like it does. And so, the psychological benefit of that is hard to measure. And if you're the Cardinals and you're going in, for whatever reason, let's say that they're playing the Mets in the wild card round and, it's a winner-take-all game 3 and somehow it ends up being Justin Verlander against Steven Matz, you don't feel great going into that, even if it works out because Matz is going to pitch 2 and then give way to Flaherty, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, there is definitely an advantage in having kind of like those hammer-type guys on the roster. But over the long haul, and again, this is maybe me, I don't know, maybe this is maybe too much thinking like Bill DeWitt. Over the course of a season, the difference is incremental. And if you have the guys in-house who are really pretty good right now, I get it. Like, I understand, the hesitancy to go after those sorts of guys. But then all of a sudden, it's October 8th and everyone is home again and you're scratching your heads wondering how that happened. Well, you didn't have a starter, and that's how you got there.
So how about Jack Flaherty? We talked about his start being pushed back. I'm not really worried about that, but just your thoughts on what he could bring this season, and also, do you think is there any chance? We keep looking ahead, but any chance he's with the Cardinals beyond 2023, in your opinion?
I do think there is a chance for sure. The question is going to be like, the thing that I have a hard time with is figuring out what his season looks like that makes that happen. Because if he has a healthy season, a healthy, strong season, why wouldn't he want to go to the market, right? Like, why wouldn't anyone? If Jack Flaherty pitches through this season as good as he was in 2019 and 2020, maybe people forget that 2020 he was also extremely good. They just wrapped him in bubble wrap coming out of COVID, and then we never really saw him get going. If he's that good, why wouldn't he try to go be a $240 million pitcher somewhere? The other side of that is, if it's another year where he makes 11 starts and has a 4.8 ERA, why would the Cardinals want to be in the Jack Flaherty business? Because that would be 3 lost years in a row, right? And so, like, I think all of the stuff about him wanting to go back to LA and wanting to do this, that, and the other thing, I think all of that is static and not that important. What I have a hard time with is just figuring out where the value match lies. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they get it done in spring, and maybe it's, a 3-year deal at a high dollar. Because the other thing about Flaherty that it's worth remembering is that he's going to hit the market much younger than an average starter is. I think he's going to be 27 as a free agent this winter. So he's going to be 3-4 years younger than a lot of guys are when they hit free agency. So maybe the Cardinals can make that happen. Maybe he's healthy enough and feels good enough to sort of sign that kind of 3-4 year bridge deal. Maybe that would surprise me, but I guess it's not impossible, and is maybe the place where kind of like need and value intersect a little bit.
All right, so how about Handshake Gate? You provided me and this YouTube channel with the audio. Thank you for that. I appreciate all your hard work down there. CB Bucknor and Ali Marmol, apparently in the offseason, they still had some raw emotions about last year. How surprised were you by that whole fiasco? And then I guess how honest and forthcoming Ali was in his critique of Mr. Bucknor?
So I was really surprised by it, primarily because I didn't even clock at the time that they hadn't run into each other for the rest of the season. Like, the thing in Arizona happened in August. I just assumed that they had crossed paths at some point throughout the rest of the year. Didn't even cross my mind that it would be a thing. And so I thought the transparency was jarring. I go, oh, okay, we're doing this. I joked with Ollie that afternoon. I told him, I said, I feel like maybe you did like one extra radio ad this winter just so you kind of stashed that away when MLB came calling. And he laughed and walked away. But clearly there was a purpose to that. And I think more broadly, and a thing that I would be curious about that he's not going to talk about, nor should he, probably for the good of himself or the team, I would be curious if he felt like CB was not the only guy who came to him with that kind of attitude last summer. If you watch that video Buckner tells him, "You just got here. Your career was over 22." And the message from the umpire, which what a message from an umpire, was, "You haven't been in the game long enough to quote unquote earn good calls," which that's not what you want. But that was the message from CD Buckner. And I would be very curious if Ollie felt like, even if Buckner was the loudest about it, if he wasn't the only guy who treated him that way last year, and this was his way of putting other guys on notice, right? Because he doesn't really, there's nothing he can really do other than drag guys publicly, and so maybe this is his way of being like, that's fine. Last year was last year. If this persists, I'm going to have 9 more conversations where I hang umpires out to dry. And eventually the fine checks will get big enough that he'll have to stop. But I do wonder if there was a little bit of like on notice to other people and not just CB, because it was so anomalous that it's like there has to be more happening here, because this is too weird to just be one thing.
All right, Jeff, let's start wrapping up like this. Any storylines you think we're not talking about, a player that caught your eye, maybe that doesn't make the roster right away but kind of surprises us later in the season? Anybody that we're kind of missing discussing?
Yeah, I think there are 2 that one that I think will make the team, and one that probably won't, but could impact later in the year. Wilking Rodriguez, the guy that they got from the Yankees in the Rule 5 draft, that's a guy that they like, a guy that they tried to sign out of Mexico last year. And his Mexican League team wouldn't release him because they were winning too many games and he was their closer. He was not real excited about that. As it turns out, we got to talk to him. Doesn't speak English very well through the translator. Got the impression wasn't real thrilled about how that all went down. But I heard a guy, and here's the real spring training sicko stuff. Heard someone say that he threw the best bullpen that they'd ever seen. That they were watching him on the TrackMan, and he spotted every spot and was throwing the sinker and went like 89, 91, 93, 95, 97, like ramped it perfect, and the glove didn't move. They were totally in love with him. So I think the stuff plays. I think they're going to want to give it a shot, and I think you shouldn't be shocked if you see him in maybe some leverage spots early in the year. In terms of guys that maybe aren't going to make the team, but that you probably should still have an eye on, I think that Connor Thomas probably has a difficult climb as far as cracking this roster right now. I think it's more likely that he ends up in the rotation at Memphis, which is fine. He last year didn't have this cutter that he developed with Jason Isringhausen that he pitched through the fall league with. But I think Connor Thomas is going to end up pitching some important innings for the Cardinals at some point this summer, whether that's as a spot starter type guy, whether that's as a guy who you see as a lefty reliever out of the bullpen. I think that's a guy to definitely keep an eye on. And I'll toss in one more for bonus, because who knows? Oscar Mercado is a guy I would not totally discount the possibility of making the team. Remember, they had a spot for Ben DeLuzio for a month on the roster last season, and Oscar Mercado does all the stuff that DeLuzio did, but better, and has experience. And by the way, was once managed by Ollie Marmol early in his career, early in the minors. And don't discount how important that stuff can be. Managers have guys who they know, who they like, who they trust. Mercado's got that connection, has the glove, has the legs. Would not be totally bowled over if he somehow ends up on the roster as a 5th outfielder, pinch runner type guy.
All right, for everybody still watching, we appreciate it. Please comment, like, subscribe on the channel. Jeff, thanks again for your hard work and contributing to the channel down there. Before we let you go, anything you want to plug? Belleville News-Democrat, anything you got going on?
That's where you can find me, at bnd.com and in the pages of the Belleville News-Democrat. Please swing on by and give it a shot. I'll even have some Battlehawk stuff coming up here in the next couple of weeks.
Ooh,
Brian Hill, Pride of Belleville West, big deal for us. We'll be getting over there and getting our cacaw on. But no, we're less than a month away from opening day at this point, so we'll be inundating with Cardinal stuff all season long.
Awesome. Once again, Jeff Jones, Belleville News-Democrat. Thank you very much, sir. It was fun.
Anytime.
Appreciate it. We'll do it again soon. Thanks.
For sure.